It's the Go Gopher Podcast with Mike Grimm, episode number 128. I am Mike Grimm, voice of the Golden Gophers, and welcome back to the podcast. We're getting closer and closer to the start of fall camp for the Golden Gopher football team, so we're going to talk football this week with the Gopher Guru from GophersGuru.com, Daniel House. He has several insightful topics we're discussing this week on episode 128. It's always great to catch up with Daniel. Our Go Gopher Podcast is presented by alumni-owned Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're a business founder planning to exit your business, start by contacting Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. Sunbelt serves more businesses up to $5 million in revenue than anyone, and True North M&A serves companies with revenues up to $150 million. You can get a confidential, no-cost, no-obligation business valuation started today. Make the most of your life's work. Visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union is also a big sponsor of the Go Gopher Podcast. Life math is complicated, and Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union makes it easier with local financial experts available to help in person or virtually. You can go to affinityplus.org/GoGophers for more info. That's affinityplus.org/GoGophers. Affinity Plus also has an award-winning mobile app, so check that out as well. We're podcasting episode 128 from the Aquarius Home Services studio. We invite you to subscribe to the Go Gopher Podcast. It's free to do so. You can also go back and listen to previous Go Gopher podcasts. Last week, for example, we had a terrific conversation with Gopher women's basketball star Mara Braun. She gave us an injury update, talked about the summer workouts, and much more. She was sponsored by Affinity Plus. This week, we're talking Gopher football with the Gophers Guru Daniel House, who will join me next.
I'm Clay Geary, walk-on turned scholarship wide receiver for Gopher football.
And I'm Ben Utek, U of M alumni, Super Bowl champion, and Tony Dungy Uncommon Award winner.
We understand championship culture, which is why we're part of the True North family of companies.
True North invests in only elite teams, like the champion team at Sunbelt Business Advisors, Minnesota's largest seller of companies. To learn more about True North and our diverse family of independently owned companies, visit TrueNorthEquityPartners.com.
It's episode 128, the Go Gopher Podcast. We are here in early July, just past the 4th of July holiday, and before you know it, fall football camp will be starting for the Golden Gophers. Big Ten Media Days are upcoming. I think there'll be a local media day, it sounds like maybe next week, where some players will be made available as well, and we want to do a little preview. So who else to talk about Gopher football than the Gophers Guru? He is Daniel House. Daniel, how are you? Good to see you. Welcome back.
Hey, man, I'm doing well. 4th of July passed. That means football is going to be here pretty fast now, so buckle down.
Yeah, here we go, right? I always say, hey, I can't wait for football season, but I also say I also don't want summer to go away. We don't want to wish good days away, although it seems to be rainy a lot, and that's fine. The lawns look good. The golf courses are in good shape, but gosh, give us some sunny days we can go out and enjoy here in July and August. But football is around the corner. So we've got a bunch of different things that we want to ask you about. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, though, remind all of our listeners here on the Go Gopher Podcast what GophersGuru.com is all about.
Well, you can subscribe at GophersGuru.com, premium content, so film breakdowns, research analysis on recruiting when guys get committed. Basically anything you want as a fan to look at the game from a different perspective, outside lens, not too complex, simplified down for fans to understand the game through a different lens. So that's basically what you're getting through the subscription on the website.
And how long is this now for you at the GophersGuru.com?
4 years, July 1st.
Man.
So that's pretty crazy. I started it during the pandemic, and I'm like, man, I'm probably a fool trying to do this during that time frame, but it's been fun to watch it grow and continue to expand and connect with new people. So I'm thankful for the fans. It's been cool to build it up.
Yeah, so much good content as well. And as we mentioned, we've got a lot of topics to discuss here as we are now in the midst of this offseason and approaching now really a lot of the offseason's in the rearview mirror. But certainly at this point, this is where a lot of the gains are made, right, in terms of strength and conditioning. Guys get faster, guys get stronger. They really can't do much with the football coaching staff, but they do a lot with the strength and conditioning folks. And I think that's an underrated or undervalued part of it. Programs like Minnesota really count on this time, right, to get better?
Yeah, and it's self-led. I've heard a lot about Max Brosmer and the way he's sort of rallied everyone around to doing the things they need to do to get better during this time frame. And then you mentioned Dan Nickel, who is kind of an unheralded person in the program, where that strength coach hire is extremely important, and they've had continuity there. And Dan's one of the best in the country. There's a lot of people always trying to get him to come and be their strength coach. So Minnesota's been able to hang on to him. And that's a big part of it. Like you said, these younger players that need to ascend, you're in that transition phase at a couple different position groups, and the gains that are made now will be pivotal as they enter the season.
You mentioned Max Brosmer, the quarterback from New Hampshire, and I know we're going to go into an in-depth breakdown. People ask me all the time, I've been to different events this summer, how good are the Gophers going to be? New Big Ten, we'll talk about that, all this different stuff. And I have been kind of saying, look, and I don't want to throw a bunch of pressure on a single position, but in sports, the quarterback spot might be the most important position in all of sports. I've kind of answered that by saying it depends on how good the quarterback's going to be. If Max Brosmer turns out to be really good, this team can be really good. If it turns out that he struggles with the transition from FCS to FBS, then they won't be as good. I know that's a simple breakdown. I know there's a lot more, and we're going to go in deep. But what do you think of Max Brosmer, and do you think that assessment, there's some truth to that assessment?
Yeah, it's always going to come down to quarterback play. That person has to be the dynamic influence for everybody else to lead and bring the team forward and just be that centering voice. And that's what I've heard a lot from people that are around the program is Max really came in here and made a strong impression and getting everybody to gravitate toward him, making that mark. And I think that's the part that isn't talked about enough when you're looking at a quarterback, ability to rally the team and generate chemistry. And that's definitely been the case early on the field. I would just say that accuracy, anticipation, those are the two traits that definitely they wanted to get in this offensive system to be able to do some of the things that they want to do schematically. And the whole thing that I look at when watching him play is ability to hit the outlets, so go through the whole progression and hit the check down as needed. He's not afraid to take that, and he understands where those are to be able to be in a situation where if it's 1st and 10 and everything's covered, you get down, work through the progression and hit the back, you can get 5 yards, it's 2nd and 5, and your play calling playbook is wide open. Your predictability goes down. Like, there are a ton of possibilities just because of the fact maybe there's going to be more check down possibility in the offense. But you look at what he's able to do at the FCS, he's one of the top quarterbacks versus the blitz, ability to kind of move around as needed and find his targets. But I'd say that processing side of it is the big deal, and then the leadership traits. But quarterback's always important, but I think there are positions you got to have a good supporting cast around it. So there's always variables that tie into having success, not just the quarterback.
You were able to see some of the spring workouts. There weren't a lot necessarily open to us, but we were able to see a little bit. Hopefully we'll see some more here in fall and have a little bit of an idea before that North Carolina game kicks off. What was your takeaway in watching Brosmer in the spring?
I just think it's all going to come down to getting used to playing at the Power 5 level. It's a transition. The guys that have done it in the past few years have been successful going from the FCS to the Power 5. But it's the speed of the game. Everything's just a split second faster. The windows are tighter. You got to learn how to shape the football. You got to know, you're going to have pass rushers long, 80-plus inch wingspan pass rushers coming in there disrupting things, all the different disguises, the speed of everybody in the back end of the defense. I feel he'll get there. It's just the reps of, FCS, you got a little bit more time to, shape the football differently than you do at the Power 5 level. So I think that's going to be the big thing. He'll get there. He's going to adjust to it just through the fall camp. That part is going to be very important. They're going to set up a lot of competitive situations just to get him used to that. But the good thing is that processing is definitely there, which will help him transition.
Daniel House with us, gophersguru.com, all kinds of great content all year long, not just in the season. As we are getting closer to fall camp, though, if you're not a subscriber, this is a good time to pick up because you get a lot of this preseason stuff, and then once the season starts, there's content all the time. All right, so we've talked quarterback a little bit, Daniel. Key positions besides quarterback where you think if Minnesota's to have, an outstanding year. I just saw, and I'm surprised, frankly, I just saw that someone tweeted out that the over-under on wins by, I think, DraftKings is 4.5, which seems low to me. But then I look at that schedule, and if things go sideways, I guess there's a path to which you'd get less than 4. But let's assume that you want to get more than 4. You want to have a good year. You want to have a great year. What are positions that you're keeping an eye on that will be key for that?
I'm zoning in on safety. You're obviously going through a transition there. Tyler Nubin going to the NFL, the Giants, and Howden the previous year. And that, you watch last year, there were some growing pains in there. Darius Green learning, getting used to all the eye candy you get from offenses, the pre-snap motion, the different looks that you're getting, being able to recognize and process. And the Gophers ask a lot out of their safeties from a coverage standpoint. So they need to see some growth from Darius from the coverage area of things. Aiden Gooseby might get some reps to compete for that job as well. And then you look at the free safety position. You got Coleman Bryson. You got Kerry Brown, who could potentially emerge. He was in the bowl game a little bit, and I thought, it definitely looked like he had made some strides just in that short period of time. We haven't been around as much, like you said, to see. But he was someone that caught my eye in the recruiting process that I thought could really fit the scheme well. But like I say, that safety spot, they ask a lot out of those guys, lining up, making checks, coverage-wise, being able to match routes, and all the things that you need from the defense sort of center around the safety room. With Dubin being that voice not there, that's the position where I feel like it's the heartbeat of the defense, and you're going to need some growth. Defensive tackle, maybe you need one more guy to emerge there. It looks like Devin Eastern is going to maybe go to the one-tech spot with Logan Redding at the 3. But, I think they're going to be pretty fluid up front. Maybe some more fronts, different looks that they're going to throw out, especially if they get teams backed up behind the sticks into passing down situations. You can get Anthony Smith, Ja Joyner, Jalen Logan Redding, Devin Eastern all out on the field at the same time, and Strigow maybe moving off ball. Like, you can do a lot of things with all those 5 techs you got, trying to get them on the field. So I'm watching that, and the passing downs nickel on defense as well. They need someone that can fluidly move and cover. They added Jayonte McMillan. Is he going to be able to be that guy that can come in and be the coverage player when you have the early down nickel and Jack Henderson, Craig McDonald? Those guys are more about fitting the run. They're kind of like a quasi Sam linebacker fitting the run. So do they have that versatile passing downs nickel? And then I'd say wide receiver on offense. They added Christian Driver and Tyler Williams. Are those two going to be able to come in and give you some productivity? That's going to be real key. They need Elijah Spencer, Lemeki Brockington to elevate, just so that there's complementary options to Daniel Jackson for defenses that they have to account for, multiple playmakers.
Yeah, no question. I love Daniel I almost said Daniel House. I love you too, but Daniel Jackson as a receiver. And totally off subject, they got a Daniel Jackson now coming in as a kicker at some point down the road from Alexandria as well, so that's kind of cool. How about the tight end spot? I think that's a spot that you're looking at as well, right?
Yeah, tight end is, Brevin Spanford, in the NFL, Dallas Cowboys. You got Jamison Gears elevating up. He's been in the program for a while, caught a touchdown in the bowl game. For him, it's going to be about staying healthy. That was a big thing the coaches talked about, emphasizing all those little details so that he can stay on the field. So he's probably the primary guy. And then Nick Caller up as the blocking player. He's been around. He can handle that role, be very serviceable there. And then you look at after that, who's emerging. Maybe it's Pierce Walsh, who's made a lot of physical gains, moves really well for a guy with his size profile, can be more of a mismatch player that you can put all over to get yourself into different formations. I think versatile tight ends open up a lot of possibilities for you as an offensive schemer to just be able to get into many different formations that cause a lot of stress on the defense. You can get them into stacks and bunches and align them out wide, put them in line, go all over the place just to create some mismatches. So I'm watching Pierce as somebody that, Is he going to be someone that can emerge? They need another depth player to kind of ascend there in the event, especially if somebody were to get hurt.
You mentioned Walsh as maybe one of those guys that you're keeping an eye on. Are there a handful of other young players that maybe the casual Gopher fan isn't aware? They maybe seen their name on the roster, but they haven't hit the field much. That I don't want to say time for breakout year, but maybe be a contributor in one way, shape, or form. Are there a few guys like Walsh that you would include in that group?
Yeah, and I like how you put that because I feel like breakout, everybody just expects that somebody's going to come in and play a huge role.
Right.
Sometimes those breakout, I like to call it like role players that can come in and maybe give you a few snaps here or there, help you in a certain way within certain packages. And I think Walsh is one of those guys that I'll be watching in fall camp. Theo Randall, a defensive tackle who really has all the traits that you're looking for in a defensive tackle, long, twitchy player who could play between alignments in the interior. I've heard a lot of good things about just how much he immerses himself in football, really, really buying into what Winston's doing there. He's created a dynamic room there. Those guys really have improved significantly. A lot of those players I think he saw it last year. I'm looking forward to seeing the leap that they can make this year. I think that's really going to define the season, what they can get out of the pass rush. The elite teams, you look at them, you evaluate them like I did this offseason. They all have the dynamic pass rush, both interior and external pressure, huge factor. So I'm watching him. Jackson Howard coming in here as a transfer from LSU, Robbinsdale Cooper, top player in that class. Can he be a rotational rush end for you? I mean, Danny Strigow is going to lead the way at that spot, but I think there's some question marks about who that next role player is going to be at that position. Can Jackson give you a few snaps? Is it Lucas Finnessy? What does the rotation look like? And then at corner, you got Zaquan Bryan, who played well in the bowl game. Coaches are really excited about the strides that he's made. He can really move. He's a fluid mover. He's physical. I could see, is there a situation where he maybe kicks into the nickel on passing downs to give you that dimension that you're looking for? I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just going to kind of see what his role looks like moving into the season. And then Kerry Brown, we mentioned him. Is he somebody that slides into a very prominent role? They're going to let those safeties compete it out, create a competitive environment. Danny Collins is going to try to get those guys ready to play. I know people are talking a lot about Coy Parrish, super talented, athletic, gives you everything that you're looking for, movement skill-wise in a safety. But, now he's coming in June. If he's coming in January, there's a lot more time to get the information and, acclimate. How quickly can he acclimate? Is there a situation where he can get on the field for passing downs? Potentially, but we'll let it play out and see. There's a lot of things that have to be figured out in fall camp, especially in that second and third tier of the roster, which I think is where is the difference between being a solid team and a very good team is what you get from those second and third tier guys.
You mentioned some of those guys involved in the secondary, and I think that's important. They were successful, I think, right, in the transfer portal to add some depth there. Take us through, if you can, some of the pieces they added transfer-wise, particularly on the defensive side of the football.
Ethan Robinson is going to be a big player for them. They need him to play well. Transfer for Bucknell. I feel he's a very good zone corner. He can break foot, drive foot, and just explode into the passing lane. That's definitely where I thought he was the best. How's he going to be as a man cover corner? We'll find out. I think he showed some ability in that area at the spring practice I was at. I was like, man, there's a couple very nice man coverage reps. And as he elevates up here, working with Nick Monroe, there's definitely talent there. You look at the metrics that you want to evaluate of guys translating up to the Power Five. He checks many of those boxes. So his transition is really important. I'm glad you brought that up because him opposite Justin Wally on the outside, they needed an experienced player that can come in here and be productive, especially as some of these young players, is people like Zaquan Bryan will get rotated in, maybe Rylan Kelly. But you want to have that transition year. Trayvon Jones came in and quietly played really well for them last year.
Yep.
FCS player, again, playing cornerback from Elon. I think going to the FCS route for cornerbacks is definitely a good strategy. I've seen a lot of teams do that. If you mine it right, you find the productive players that can come in and give you a lift. So I'd say Ethan's the big one there. Jayonte McMillan, like you said, kind of a safety nickel hybrid. played a little bit at TCU in that type of role. You can come in on passing downs and give you something. I'm just fascinated to see kind of how all those pieces come together. Craig McDonald, I kind of consider him a transfer in this class because you had that late ruling on whether he was going to be eligible, got in a bit, but not a lot. Early down passing nickel, more of the physical player. Jack Henderson didn't practice in the spring, should be ready to go for the season, but Craig and him are going to handle that rotational nickel role on early down. So that's what I kind of noticed from the secondary. They need that secondary, some of those young players. That season's really going to be defined by that group. I think elite secondary play is what you need. It can be the difference between, adding 1 or 2 or 3 wins to your win total at the end of the year if you get really good secondary play.
Yeah, no question about it. And now when you talk about the secondary, you mentioned Monroe, you mentioned Collins. There is no Joe Rossi for the first time for a while in terms of calling the plays and being the guy in charge. So P.J. Fleck has turned to Corey Heatherman, who comes from Rutgers. He was a D coordinator at James Madison, very successful prior to that. What could you glean from what we might expect from a Corey Heatherman-led defense when you watched both film from his previous stops and what you saw maybe in spring camp?
Yeah, watch it at James Madison. He's a defensive line guy. That's in his blood. They get off of blocks really well. I mean, he's a very good coach at teaching block deconstruction, the run fit side of it, making sure everybody's playing discipline. You look at his run defenses at James Madison, a lot of 90th plus percentile rush defenses and the metrics that you want to look at. So he definitely understands that run game piece. And that's an important part. Like I watch their defenses and I go, okay, they're trying to get this offense to play left-handed. You want to be really good on the run against the run on first and second down. So then you can knock them off the rails and get them into, passing down situations and then let it rip, be exotic, get all those pass rushers on the field, be aggressive in that respect. I think that's something that you might notice a little bit more blitzing in those second and third down situations. They're definitely going to be cognizant of limiting explosive plays, but there are certain positions on the field where, teams in logo range and that, you got an opportunity to send some pressure. You look at first down blitzing, first down, sending an additional rusher on first down at Rutgers. They're in the top half of the country in that area. So, trying to get offenses within certain situations, you got to know when to dial it up. And I think he's showing that he's pretty good at that, to know when and where to apply pressure versus certain protections and certain down and distance situations. But I would say those variables are important. His defense last year, he coached the linebackers. They were one of the best teams at fewest missed tackles in the country. So they had very good discipline there. I just think it's going to be a little bit more exotics in the passing down situation. Joe was pretty exotic too, but I think, cognizant of limiting the explosive, maybe you'll get some different fronts in those situations where it's overload fronts. I wrote a piece on that on the website about overload fronts in the NFL, in college, how teams are using them. I think it's something that the Gophers might put in play to get all those pass rushers on the field. So you can check that out on the website too.
Well, we all love Joe Rossi and wish him well at Michigan State. What a great coach he was here for Minnesota. The one thing that is a positive out of that is there's only one guru now hanging out at the facility, and that's you, right? They called Joe Rossi the guru. You've got, the title Gophers Guru, so now you can exclusively hold that title.
I will not take the title away. Joe is always the guru, man. He earned the title, man. That's what they gave him. So I'm letting him always have that. He's going to do real well at Michigan State, though.
Yeah, they've got a good head coach there as well, and then they've got, I think, some NIL money that I think they're going to like there as well. We'll get into that when we talk about Big Ten here in a second. So the Corey Heatherman defense should be a fun one to watch. Maybe a little more aggressive, as you mentioned. Now. Big Ten. We look around there. Let's go to to Sparty here. Let's talk about them first. We're not going to go through the whole league, but I think there are some trends that we can hit on. They have some name, image, and likeness money. It sounds like Jonathan Smith turned a relatively moribund Oregon State outfit into a team that for a minute was actually in a playoff discussion last year, and now he's the head coach at Michigan State. He has Joe Rossi as a defensive coordinator. What do you see from them and what they might be able to do in this now 18-team Big Ten Conference?
I'm telling you, Jonathan Smith's coming, and he's going to bring some fresh ideas. I love their offensive scheme. It's more of an NFL type of system, under center, 2 tight end, dictating the personnel that the defense is going to get into, having a nice run game that, ability to be efficient in that area, valuing really good tackle breaking backs. You look at the add in K'Ron Lynch-Adams from UMass, a very, very elusive player who could make the first man miss, and you got to have one back like that. You pair him up with Nathan Carter coming back. That run game is going to be a huge part of what Jonathan Smith's looking to do. Brings Aiden Childs with him from Oregon State, who is really going to have a lot of options off the play action game. I think the receiver room is going to dictate their success offensively. They need one more receiver to emerge. Marsh, the young player, I think he's got a chance to be maybe a breakout player that nobody's talking about, that everyone's going to go, who is this guy? Defensively, Joe came in, added a lot of quality, solid pieces, really focused on the defensive line. They had some exits there at defensive tackle, going and getting Jalen Satchel from Old Dominion, adding Jordan Turner, linebacker from Wisconsin, Wayne Matthews, who I think was a very productive player at Old Dominion that fits Joe's system well, disciplined player, good in coverage to be able to handle those zone coverage drops. Nakai Martinez, a UCF transfer as well, is very versatile, can play a couple different roles, maybe that passing downs nickel player that Joe likes in his defense. So I think Michigan State added a lot of talent. I think they did a really good job of navigating some of their departures, bringing some players with him, Jonathan Smith did, and also adding through the transfer portal. He's one of the best game managers in college football. I've been studying game management of coaches, and I'm telling you, Jonathan Smith, I don't know, I think he's probably looking at the numbers, doing some things there, and just manages a game really well, which can be worth a couple wins every year. That staff is impressive, and they're going to be a force in the Big Ten moving forward here.
Another program with a new coach is Indiana. What do you see happening there? They've got some uniqueness. That head coach is something else.
I really am intrigued by Indiana. I don't think people are talking enough about it. Signetti loves it that way. He came in basically saying, we're going to win. I'm bringing this thing.
He says, Google
I've
me.
won everywhere. Yeah, Google me is basically what he said.
Yeah.
And I kind of low-key like it. You go back and look at what he's been able to do at previous stops. I mean, he's won right away. I believe it's like, what was it? It's like 7 wins at IUP, 8 at Elon, and then 14 at James Madison in first seasons. But he brings all these transfers, highly productive players at James Madison at premium positions, really invests in the wide receiver room. Elijah Surratt's going to be a really good player for them. Transfer from James Madison, wide receiver that will be on everybody's radar. You look at being able to bring in a couple of different skill sets at that position. Miles Price, Miles Cross, Kayshawn Williams, all have different skill sets. They invested a ton of productive players into that wide receiver room, and I think that's where you have to put it, to be able to be dynamic in multiple respects offensively, and then defensively being able to bring in James Carpenter, an elite defensive tackle at that level. How's he going to transition to the Big Ten? I think he's got some great traits and is an ascending player that, probably would have went somewhere in the portal anyways, but follows his head coach to Indiana. All of those pieces coming together and watching James Madison, how well coached they are. I mean, you go look at Indiana's first 6 games. Like, I think there's a plausible scenario where Indiana's sitting at 6-0 right at the beginning of the season. Like, I don't think people are talking enough about IU. How do the pieces come together? It's always a question, but just looking at the roster at a very, detailed level, I think that they can maybe out-achieve expectations.
Yeah, how about that? Any other interesting takeaways is now in this new age, and, a year ago it was a new age, 2 years ago it was a new age, but it really is a new age each year with different rules and the way things are interpreted, the way teams now are able to, okay, this is how it's working, all right, here's how we're going to raise money. Any other teams in the Big Ten in terms of their roster building intrigue you?
Yeah, USC really putting a lot of resources into that secondary. They had to do that. They hired D'Anton Lynn from UCLA, who will be trying to fix that defense. They were so fundamentally poor defensively. It held them back. I thought offensively, their run game uh, wasn't as good last year, which certainly impacted all the things that they wanted to do in the passing game. So how does all that come together? I think USC made some really good portal moves. I look at, for example, how's the transition going to go with Michigan lost a lot of talent, but also did a good job in the portal mining around getting some ads at positions where they were losing players. And then you got a brand new head coach in a sense that, Sharon Moore had experience in games last year in that, interim role, but what's he going to be like now that he's leading the program and being that front man? I'm fascinated to see how the transition goes because I thought they made some good additions in the portal. Wisconsin, again, I mean, they really hit the portal hard, finding some FCS players that I think are going to be really intriguing. John Pius, a pass rusher from William and Mary, fits that attacking defense that they have. He could be someone that people are sleeping on. Nebraska bringing back a lot of talent. Like, I have my eyes on Nebraska through the first few games here. How does it all come together? That defense, bringing back talent. It's a really tough scheme. Tony White's got a lot of stuff going there where it's like it's a very hard defense to play against. I think you saw that last year in that first game of Minnesota, like trying to figure out how to crack that code because his fronts are so different. You're moving players around, you're sending blitz pressure, which changes the whole processing for the quarterback. And I think that scheme's tough. And based on the additions that they brought in the transfer portal, plus they were able to retain almost all of their talent. I mean, Matt Rule's done a really good job
and
of
the quarterback,
talent,
right?
but also dashing. It's all going to come down to quarterback. Like, what are you going to get out of the quarterback position when it comes to, they put the eggs in the basket of Dylan Raiola here. Is he going to be legitimate? We'll find out if he is. Nebraska has a lot of intriguing talent on that roster.
That's another team that you look at their schedule. Now, they have Colorado again, but I don't know if Colorado's any good. They have talent. They could be a 6-0 team, Nebraska, to start the year. Maybe 8-0 when it's all said and done if you look at their schedule, even in what I think is an enhanced Big Ten. That said, how many times you're going to get hit over the head with, this is the year Nebraska is going to get back to their old self. It seems like it's about a 10 straight year stretch where the preseason magazines are in love with Nebraska, and they just haven't fulfilled the bill. But this might be the year.
You just look at the trends, you could see in previous years, you look at productivity, you look at some of the things that matter in roster building. They weren't there yet. Like, I feel Matt Rule shot that thing back up year one. Now, can he elevate it to another level? Like, the trends seem to tell us that he's right at that line of like potentially shooting this thing up. And that's a credit to how they've gone about building their roster. These teams that do a really good job of mining the FCS and also finding highly productive players, maybe down in that lower FBS tier, the group of five, being able to blend between highly productive players at that level along with the FCS at certain position groups. It's been fun to watch how different teams in the Big Ten handle it, different teams nationally do it. Washington, they really hit the FCS level. Sacramento State, being able to bring in a couple highly productive players from there. I'm watching really particularly close how they basically put together all the pieces. Sacramento State safety Cameron Broussard's a player to watch. I watched his film and thought, man, that's a really nice ad for their defensive scheme. You got Steve Belichick running the show on defense out there. That's an NFL operation. Go look at that coaching staff. Holy buckets. That thing is filled with NFL guys.
Well, I think I'll be interested, too, with the new 12-team playoff. I just saw an article the other day that could there be as many as 4 Big Ten teams in a 12-team playoff? Certainly there's going to be years where 3 Big Ten teams get in. And because of that, you don't even necessarily have to make the Big Ten championship game to get in. I have seen in the last 2 weeks, I'm surprised, just thumbing through either the Twitter timeline or looking through different articles online, the amount of love that all of a sudden Iowa's getting. I know their defense has been good. They're talking potential playoff team with Iowa. And when you think about it, they got to be maybe the 3rd or 4th best team in the league to do that. Are you buying into that kind of hype for that team?
Well, I'm telling you, their secondary definitely has the resources back there. You look at productivity returning in that area. Sebastian Castro, I think, is one of the more under-heralded players in the whole conference. Like that guy's versatility, he could have easily went to the pros and gotten picked pretty high. Him coming back is huge. You got Nick Jackson, you got Jay Higgins at linebacker, one of the best linebacker rooms in the conference. Secondary with pieces coming back, the continuity that they're going to have within that linebacker and safety room. And then, on the defensive line, they're going to get continued production there. You look at Y.A. Black, you look at Aaron Graves inside, Deontay Craig coming back. I think that they're going to have plenty of success on defense. It's going to hinge on that offense, Grim, where you got Tim Lester running the show, reportedly going to come in and install Green Bay Packers system, that Shanahan type of influence offense where it's all about creative run game, more pre-snap motion getting injected into the offense where you're moving guys around into stacks and bunches. You're really building off of that run game and the play action passing attack. RPO game with Tim Lester and also the things he picked up in the RPO game with Matt LaFleur. This is going to be fun to see how that comes together. I don't know if they have enough talent in that wide receiver room. They went and added Jacob Gill in the portal from Northwestern. They need him to potentially ascend into a role that's meaningful. But, that offensive line, I think when I look at Iowa, Grim, like last year they underachieved at the tackle spots. Can they get improved play from their offensive line? Like, I know that's bread and butter, and everybody just expects that their offensive line is going to do really well. I think they've slowly stepped back the last 2 years in that area. Can they get some really good production out of their offensive line? And then quarterback play, Cade McNamara coming back, also added Brendan Sullivan from Northwestern. Their success is defined by the offense. I know their defense is going to play well, and they have the talent.
Yeah, I'm thinking you're right. That's part of what people are forecasting, that the offense, one, it's got to be better. It can't be any worse. There just have to get better quarterback play. It doesn't matter who plays amongst any of them. You or me might be able to step in and get what they got last year out of that position, which basically held that program hostage. So maybe that's part of it. Because when you look at it, that team with one of the worst offenses in the history of the Big Ten won 10 last year and made the championship game of the Big Ten Conference. So if you get their better quarterback play, and as you mentioned, Tim Lester, if he's the answer there, then I suppose that's the projection that people are making to make them a playoff caliber type team, or at least be in that mix. Big Ten realignment, 18 teams. It started July 1st, so it's week one of that. I saw a bunch of people tweeting out the standings, right? I mean, everyone's 0-0, but it does look bizarre to see 18 teams there, including, as we've mentioned, Washington and Oregon, USC and UCLA. And then the weirdness of an unbalanced schedule. Obviously, it's not a round robin, too much for that. There's no divisional play, which drives me up a wall. I think that's a big mistake, frankly. And then you got the top two teams making the championship game in a game that may or may not be meaningful at all. I mean, it won't mean anything. Both those teams, whatever two teams make the Big Ten championship game, are going to be in the playoffs, right? That is almost certain. And then the question is going to be, would one of those teams get knocked out for a team that's not in the championship game? And if they're both locked in, obviously the winner is going to get a bye, but would you put everybody at risk, or would you rest some people like the last week of an NFL season before the playoffs? And I don't know the answer to any of that, and I've kind of led you down a road that I'll just leave it open-ended. What do you think of realignment?
Well, I'm fascinated by it. I feel the whole narrative is around how will the Pac-12 teams, how will the Big Ten teams adjust to the Pac-12 teams? I think you got to look at it the other way as well. They're coming in here to a different style of play. The offensive and defensive line, trench play, very physical at the point of attack. Like this style of play, when you get 2-3 tight ends coming in the game, it's November, it's cold. Like, how are all these teams going to adjust personnel-wise? I think you're starting to see these schools really begin to emphasize O-line and D-line and recruiting in a different way, where they're going to bring in impact guys. They're going to recruit the Midwest area because they can sell it, that like, hey, you're going to be able to play a lot of games back home. So now I'm watching the next 2 to 3 years, how these teams build their roster, what their approaches are like. Oregon coming in, national championship caliber team. Last year, they were really close. Then they go in the portal and just absolutely destroy it. I don't think there's a team that did a better job in the transfer portal. Secondary, bringing in Jabbar Muhammad, Cam Alexander, Brandon Johnson, a versatile nickel who can do a whole bunch of stuff for your defense, Kobe Savage in the back end. You just go and look at what Oregon was able to bring in and the type of coach that Dan Lanning is.
Yeah.
They're my favorite to win the whole thing this year.
And
so you got
the quarterback,
national
right?
championship player and the quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, leading the charge. You look at player value. You look at the things that matter at the quarterback position. That transition should be pretty seamless going into what they kind of laid the foundation with Will Stein and Bo Nix last year. Just so much success. Those two really had a system that complemented their strengths, really the strengths of Bo Nix, and then also accentuated the playmakers. But, I think this is interesting times. The teams that adapt fastest, that build their roster with premium positions as a salary cap starts to come into play. How do you fit all the pieces together? Realignment coming, like these innovative coaches that are willing to keep up with where it's going, they're going to have the success in the long run.
And obviously it helps when you have resources. Oregon's got resources. Ohio State has resources. We talked about Michigan State, maybe under the radar resources, those kind of things. You mentioned salary cap. How do you envision this all going? Will there be a revenue share eventually, pay for play? How do you think it goes in the future?
Well, the fascinating aspect of it is how will the universities divide the money up? The speculation is this going to be $21 million to the athletic department. How much of it goes to football, men's basketball, the other sports? Then you got to figure out, okay, how do you break up the roster to match up with your coach's philosophy, what he views as important, plus where the game is going, what positions you need to invest in to be successful. Because now with money involved, you got to be very, very, very detailed in how you approach it. You got to be educated in terms of which players are productive at previous stops that you can bring in. How much for-you recruiting do you do, and how do you blend that with the transfer portal? Do you prop up the back half of your roster with more transfers? This is going to transition more into like an NFL type setup where college football has always been about the long game and roster building where it's process. Everything's been the same. You got these big rosters, you got walk-ons, you got time to invest in for-you recruiting on the back half of your roster. But with 85 spaces, you're going to have to be more intentional about how you build your team to be able to compete. How do you get depth on your roster? Is that through the transfer portals? Is it less for-you recruiting? You have to strike the right balance between those things, and then you got to allocate your funds the right way based on which positions matter. And that's where the athletic departments across the country, they have to get out front of this, because if you're scrambling to try to climb uphill with this thing, you're going to be left in the dust. Because like you say, the programs with the financial resources, they're going to be ready to rock. They're going to bring in the people that can help them do it, and they're going to take off. So it's a pivotal moment for college football programs.
Yeah, and I think there's still some stuff up in the air on it. So you got the $21 million in terms of potential revenue share that is going to go to student athletes. But it's my understanding, right, that would not necessarily be the end of it. That's the number in terms of the pay for play part of it, that does not preclude companies from donating, or it's really not a donation, I guess. It's to pay players to represent them through NIL deals. So it still comes down to there still can be that gap. It's not. I think people hear a salary cap and they think, oh, well, this will immediately equalize. Everybody will be on even footing because Ohio State can't spend as much. I don't think we'll ever see that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where NIL can be used sort of as a bonus program.
Right.
That's how I've started to think about it, where it's you pay your player a certain, salary through the pay for play, if you want to say, or the salary cap. And then you've got the NIL aspect where, some teams might say, hey, we can't give you as much in the salary cap component, but we can, get you NIL, which might help you acquire players if you're cash strapped. So I'm looking at it going, do you allocate a certain amount of money just for the cap and then have some extra left over to throw toward the transfers? Like, there are all these little things that are going to come into play here that you have to think about, and which positions matter to you. Do you value the running back position as much as other teams? Do more teams value the wide receiver position? Is it going to transition more from that process-oriented approach to the outcome-oriented approach where it's like you need to build your roster for the now. And I'm fascinated that we're at this point in college football, and it's going to almost be like an NFL roster building process.
Yeah, except no, if you're terrible, it doesn't mean you get the first pick in the draft. You just still have to fight from the bottom, right? You don't, there's teams that for a while have, okay, this is a 2-year rebuild. We really don't want to win right now because we want top picks. Where that you won't see that in college football because that'll get guys fired. It's all out all the time, which should be certainly intriguing. All right, I'm saving this last question for last. And we're going back to Gopher football now. I want to ask you because this is the question. Well, I think you and I talked about this a year ago at this time, and then it's been discussed, and the question I get all the time, when are the Gophers going to start throwing the football more? What do they got to do on offense? What is the issue? Last year, of course, they struggled at times offensively, certainly at the quarterback position, and then as you maybe broke stuff down, Daniel, in terms of the offense's, inefficiencies, so to speak, or their deficiencies, what was it that it was simply just the quarterback position, and what was it of, okay, strategically, whatever didn't help the quarterback position, because it seemed to me that was an issue. So that's, to me, in today's day and age, I suppose we literally can call it the $1 million question here. What do you think from that? One, will they throw the ball more? Two, what has to happen to become – I mean, this is a kid, Brosmer, who threw for 325 yards a game last year and was among the leaders in passing yards in the country.
Well, the quarterback position, you're bringing in Brosmer, experienced. Obviously there's questions about transition, but guys have done it well in the past. You look at what he's been able to do. I think there's less question marks about that. It's more so for me – like supporting cast. What does it look like? When Minnesota's had success, these really good teams, they have a productive wide receiver room. They got backs that are really efficient at breaking tackles. You have that Darius Taylor. If he's healthy and on the field, elite tackle breaker, making the first guy miss, being able to be that centerpiece out of the backfield. They didn't have as much productivity out of that running back room last year, which hurt every element of the offense. So you got to be multidimensional. I always talk about being able to, based on what the defense is doing, if they're loading the box, you're able to have playmakers that can win on the outside, and you got multiple options that can do so. That was the case in 19 when you got, Bateman, Johnson, Demetrius Douglas, Chris Ottman-Bell, like all those wideouts that could threaten from different alignments, gave you so much offensive flexibility. And then, you had a decision to make. Do you want to dedicate coverage resources to stop the pass and then have lighter boxes that you run it into in the run game? Like, you got to get back to the point where multidimensional. You got weapons everywhere, all over the field. So the ability to throw that football at a high level comes down to quarterback play. Consistency there last year just wasn't consistent enough. The plays there to be made didn't make them. Whether it was a drop pass or it was an inaccurate ball, whether it was just missing something, or it was the playmakers. Do you have enough playmakers around him that ascend and are consistent? That's going to be what it comes down to. We mentioned it earlier. Can Elijah Spencer step up? Can Lemeki Brockington? Is it Tyler Williams, Christian Driver? Like, who is it that is going to emerge and be that complementary option to Daniel Jackson so he's getting better matchups and they can move him all over and do a lot of different things? So comes down to player development. That's the theme that I have for this season. If I was to sum it up in 2 words, player development. Those second and third tier guys are the difference between being having a successful season or taking that next step as a program. You're going to need those young players to make big strides.
Generally, from a run pass ratio, regardless of personnel, regardless of everything else, generally, what does the ratio have to be if you want to win? And I know you can't throw out personnel is a factor in it, but what did last year numbers compare to previous year's numbers? Because it seemed like they ran more, and maybe it was just because they just didn't have as much success on offense. And how does that factor in? Sometimes even if you don't have it, you just have to throw for the sake of throwing more than what has happened in the past.
And I'd say it's about the same, stylistically. But, I don't think there's a special sauce. I think that's like what people think is like run pass ratio, that you got to be this, and this, where like every game is so different. You get like this type of coverage, like when you're playing Purdue and Illinois, you're going to get a lot of man coverage. So you're going to have to motion and move people into stacks to get cleaner releases. And you're going to have to do some things differently where, you might have extra presence in the box. So it's going to be tougher to run, and you're going to need your receivers to win out on the perimeter. That defense is tough for people to attack. Then you got 3-3-5 defenses like Nebraska and Wisconsin that are sending attackers from different spots that are really disguised, and you got to figure out how to handle it. Like, every game is different in the sense that you need to have a multi-pronged approach to attacking. But I say it centers around being able to get the ball out space more. Are you able to incorporate the screen game? Can you get your playmakers in space? Can you break tackles in the open field? Can you generate yards after the catch to put more pressure on the defense? And I think that's the thing that Minnesota has to focus on improving, whether that's through, player development, whether that's through scheme, trying to put more stress on the defense in space. And then that opens it up to be able to attack vertically and be multidimensional, both in the run game and the pass game. It's complex. There are a lot of layers to it. I don't think there's a secret sauce. I am more centric in running the ball than most people through the lens of like looking at the numbers. I still think you got to have a good run game to be able to have success. It's got to be creative. It's got to, tie into the passing game effectively, because I do think ball control, in a sense, some teams really skew towards it, where they're like, you need to hang on to the ball. Other teams find that balance where they're kind of adjusting the pace over the course of the game. And that's something that I've studied a lot, is how do you vary the tempo to have success? Like, we could have a whole podcast about that type of stuff, but that's kind of the long answer about what offense looks like. There's no two games that are the same.
Yeah. Well, man, a lot of great stuff here in the podcast this week. We will have you, along with the rest of the gang, back for our annual preseason look coming up probably mid to late August. We'll get more specific in terms of predictions and kind of where you think this team, and hopefully we'll have seen a practice or two at that point. We'll get some predictions and see where we think this team is headed. But this was awesome off-season stuff. Happy 4th of July to you. Hopefully you enjoyed yesterday as we tape here on July the 5th. And always great to catch up, and we will see you soon at a football field near you.
Thanks, Grimmer. We'll see you soon.
Give us the info on how to become a subscriber to GophersGuru.com.
Head over to GophersGuru.com, click the subscribe button. $5 a month gets you access to all the content.
Best bargain in the world.
Yeah, best bargain. It's just like going to Starbucks.
No doubt.
$5 going to Starbucks.
Very good, my man. We'll talk soon.
Appreciate it.
There he is, Daniel House, the Gophers Guru. It's episode number 128. My thanks to Daniel House. You can check out all of his great work at GophersGuru.com. Always great to catch up with Daniel. What tremendous insight he gave us this week. Episode 128 is presented by Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're buying or selling a business, visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. We're also partnered with Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, a locally member-owned full-service financial invested in you. You can learn more at affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. That's affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. Again, I'd invite you to listen to past podcasts, and right now, please be sure to click that subscribe button to the Go Gopher Podcast. It's free to subscribe and free to listen at any time. And please share the link with the podcast with others so they can subscribe and listen as well. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, please offer some positive feedback. We'll talk again next week.